All social gatherings are, at their core, a form of theater. People arrive wearing their carefully selected costumes, speaking lines from a shared, unspoken script. Clara and James's party was no exception. It was a well-produced play, the set a sprawling modern home with lighting so artfully dim it forgave every flaw. The soundtrack a low thrum of indie rock and the pleasant, percussive clinking of ice in expensive glassware. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, canapes, and the particular brand of effortless bonhomie that only 3 glasses of wine can produce. I was stationed near the bar, an observer in the wings, nursing a whiskey that felt more like an anchor than a refreshment. My gaze was a searchlight, sweeping the crowded room, inevitably landing on Sophia. She was, as always, at the epicenter of the play's action. My wife possessed a kind of social gravity. People were simply drawn into her orbit. She commanded attention not by demanding it, but by exuding a light so bright it was impossible to ignore. Tonight, she was particularly incandescent, poured into a sheath of red silk that seemed to absorb and amplify the room's ambient warmth. But the light she was casting was not for me. It was for Nathan. The name itself was a discordant sound in the symphony of the evening, a scratch on the vinyl. Nathan, her colleague, a man whose charm was so slick and polished it felt entirely synthetic. He was attached to her side like a pilot fish to a shark, his posture a study in predatory intimacy. He leaned in when she spoke, his smile a fraction too wide, his laughter a beat too loud. And Sophia? Sophia was not creating distance. She was collapsing it. She was leaning into his gravitational pull, matching his energy, her eyes reflecting the party lights with a brilliance I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I told myself it was nothing. Paranoia. The quiet, corrosive insecurity of a man who feels the tectonic plates of his own marriage shifting beneath his feet. Nathan was a recent addition to the cast of our lives, introduced a few months prior through Sophia's work anecdotes. He just has this energy, she had said over a dinner that now felt like a relic from another era. He makes everyone in the room feel like they're the only one that matters. At the time, I dismissed it as the harmless admiration of a subordinate for a charismatic superior. But seeing them now, in this tableau of synchronized laughter and shared glances, I understood that I had fundamentally misread the script. The knot in my chest, a familiar companion these last few months, began its slow, merciless tightening. I decided to enter the scene. I moved toward their circle, my steps measured, my expression carefully neutral. Clara was there, along with a few other familiar faces, all of them basking in the glow of whatever story Nathan had just concluded. As I joined, Nathan's gaze swiveled to me, and he gifted me a smile so practiced it could have been patented. "Ethan," he boomed, clapping a hand on my shoulder with the false familiarity of a salesman. "Good to see you, man. Your wife here was just telling me about your trip to Italy. Sounds epic." Sophia turned to me, her own smile a pale, fleeting thing. Her expression was unreadable, a carefully guarded neutrality. "I was telling him about the vineyard tour," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Yeah," I replied, my tone flat. "It was a great trip." The conversation eddied around me, a current of meaningless words I barely registered. My entire consciousness was focused on the space between Sophia and Nathan, a space charged with an energy that felt both illicit and flagrantly public. The unease was a physical presence now, a bitter taste in my mouth, a cold weight in my gut. And then, it happened. Nathan, in a crescendo of his own performance, made a joke about Sophia's magnetic personality, how she must be the life of every dull-budget meeting. Sophia's response was not a polite titter. It was a full-throated, head-thrown-back laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight that momentarily silenced the conversations around them. And as the sound crested, she said the words that would detonate the evening. "He makes me feel alive." She said it to him, but it was for me. A poison dart delivered with a smile. The words were a physical blow, a concussive force that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. She'd said it so casually, with a playful lightness, as if she were commenting on the quality of the wine, not gutting our marriage in front of a live studio audience. The echo of her laughter hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Across the circle, I saw Clara's eyes widen, her expression a rapid-fire sequence of shock, concern, and then a profound, empathetic pity. Others in the group shuffled their feet, their gazes suddenly finding the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but the epicenter of the blast. My chest was a vice, but I did not let it show. I raised my glass, the amber liquid sloshing slightly, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The burn of the whiskey was a grounding sensation, a point of focus in a suddenly tilting world. "That's quite the compliment," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a facial wound. "Guess I'll have to step up my game, won't I?" The laughter died in Sophia's throat. She froze, her eyes locking with mine. For a single, fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in their depths. Panic? Regret? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a breezy, dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, Ethan," she chided, her tone now light and condescending. "Don't be so serious. It was just a joke." But we all knew it wasn't. It was a confession wrapped in a laugh. A declaration of independence. I gave a slow, deliberate nod, not trusting my voice, and allowed the conversation to be clumsily steered into safer, shallower waters. Inside, a cold, tectonic fury was building. That was not a joke. It was the first shot in a war I hadn't even known was being waged. The rest of the evening is a montage of blurry images and sharp, painful details. I became a ghost at the party, haunting the periphery, my gaze an invisible tether to Sophia as she continued to orbit Nathan's son. She was oblivious to the whispers that now followed her, to the sideways glances from friends who had just borne witness to our marital vivisection. But I saw them all. By the time the party began to thin, my patience had been eroded to a razor's edge. I would not confront her here. I would not give her the drama she might secretly crave. But as I helped Clara collect empty glasses, watching my wife laugh at another one of Nathan's whispered secrets, a cold, hard resolve crystallized within me. She thought he made her feel alive. By the time I was done, the only thing she would feel was the cold, heavy weight of regret. The morning after was a study in silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, pressurized one, the kind that precedes a deep-sea dive into wreckage. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in a kitchen that felt cavernous and cold. Sophia's empty chair at the table was not just an absence, it was an accusation. She was upstairs, either genuinely asleep or performing a convincing imitation of it. Either way, her retreat was a tactical maneuver, a way of delaying the inevitable debriefing of the previous night's carnage. There was a time when our mornings were a chaotic symphony of shared routines, of laughter over spilled coffee and conversations that began the night before and bled seamlessly into the new day. We were a unit, a partnership so tightly woven I thought it was unbreakable. But I had been wrong. A partnership doesn't just snap. It frays, one thread at a time, so slowly you don't notice until you're holding two separate, useless pieces of rope. Her world had become a high-gloss, high-stakes universe of corporate ambition, populated by charismatic colleagues and fueled by the relentless pursuit of something more, something else. My world had remained stubbornly grounded, rooted in the quiet, tangible realities of our shared life. I had tried to be the anchor in her storm, but I had failed to realize she was not looking for an anchor. She was looking for a different boat. Her words from the party replayed in my mind, not as a memory, but as an endless, tormenting loop. "He makes me feel alive." The phrase was a masterstroke of cruelty, a three-word summary of my perceived failures as a husband, a partner, a man. It had rendered me not just inadequate, but inanimate. It wasn't the insult that festered. It was the casual, public delivery. It was the laughter that followed, a sound that stripped me of my dignity and left me standing there, a piece of invisible furniture. I thought of the life we had built, the shared jokes, the secret languages, the blueprints for a future that now seemed like a laughable fiction. When had I been demoted? When had I become a supporting character in the grand drama of her life? A silent, off-screen presence whose only function was to pay the mortgage and water the plants. My sister, Rachel, had seen it coming. Her bluntness was a force of nature, often painful, but always rooted in a fierce, protective love. Months ago, after Sophia had canceled yet another of our rare date nights for a work emergency, Rachel had cornered me. "Don't let her treat you like an afterthought, Ethan," she'd said, her eyes hard. "Respect is a two-way street." If she's not navigating her side, you're just going to end up in a ditch. I defended Sophia, of course, with the tired platitudes of a man in denial. Asterisk, it's just a busy time. Relationships are complicated. Asterisk now, in the cold, unforgiving light of morning, Rachel's words seemed prophetic. Last night was not a ditch, it was a goddamn canyon. Even Lila, Sophia's best friend and staunchest defender, had sensed the shift. At a dinner party a few weeks back, she had pulled me aside, her expression clouded with a rare concern. "She's restless, Ethan," she'd whispered, her gaze darting towards Sophia, who was holding court across the room. "I don't think it's about you. I think it's about her. She's chasing something, but I don't think she even knows what it is." Restless. It was the perfect word. Sophia's ambition had once been a quality I admired, a shared engine driving us forward. But it had mutated, soured into a chronic dissatisfaction. Nothing was ever enough. Not her achievements, not our home, and certainly not the quiet, steady love I had offered her. As I sat there, the coffee in my mug turning to a cold, bitter sludge, a new clarity began to emerge from the fog of my hurt and anger. I could not fix this alone. I had spent years being the steady one, the reliable foundation, hoping my quiet strength would be enough to weather her storms. But last night proved that was a fool's errand. She wasn't in a storm, she was the storm. She wasn't slipping away, she was actively, consciously, pulling away, chasing a fleeting feeling offered by a man who was, I suspected, nothing more than a cheap thrill. What came next? The word divorce flickered in my mind, a cold, terrifying neon sign. The thought of dismantling our life, of explaining our failure to our families, of becoming another statistic, made me physically ill. But the thought of continuing this charade, of living in this state of polite, silent warfare, was equally nauseating. The coffee was cold. My resolve was not. Last night was not just about Sophia. It was about him. Nathan. He was not just some charming interloper. He was a symptom of the disease, and perhaps the disease itself. If I was to understand the true nature of what had befallen my marriage, I had to understand him. He was not just a flirt. He was a catalyst. And I would find out, with surgical precision, exactly what he was trying to ignite. My war against Nathan Carter was not to be a frontal assault. Men like him, men whose primary currency is their own charisma, are adept at deflecting direct attacks. They thrive on drama, twisting accusations of wrongdoing into proof of their accuser's jealousy or instability. No, my approach would be one of quiet, methodical infiltration. I would not attack the man. I would dismantle the myth. My first move was to leverage my own network, a world far removed from the high-gloss corporate sphere Sophia and Nathan inhabited. I started with Caleb, a man whose professional life as a corporate consultant had turned him into a human LinkedIn, a living repository of professional reputations, both earned and manufactured. Over lunch at a place where we were unlikely to be seen, I floated Nathan's name into the conversation, framing my interest as professional curiosity. Caleb's eyebrow arched. "Nathan Carter, the golden boy at Omnicorp." "Yeah, I know the name. He's got a reputation." "For what?" I asked, keeping my tone mild. Caleb swirled the ice in his glass, his expression thoughtful. "For being a rocket with a busted guidance system. He's brilliant, no doubt. Climbs the ladder faster than anyone. But he doesn't build bridges. He burns them behind him. He's opportunistic. Steps on anyone to get ahead." He paused, then looked at me, his gaze sharpening. "And with women, let's just say he has a particular affinity for poaching on private property. Married ones, especially. You're not the first husband to ask me about him, Ethan. Be careful. He thinks life is a game, and he plays to win, no matter the collateral damage." The confirmation landed like a block of ice in my stomach. Nathan wasn't an accidental homewrecker. He was a serial predator. This wasn't a dalliance. It was a strategy. My next step was to move from the analog world of reputation to the digital world of evidence. A little light reconnaissance on his social media profiles revealed a carefully curated persona. He was a man of action, of luxury, of desirable company. Photos from exotic vacations, exclusive events, yacht parties. Always surrounded by beautiful women, but never the same one twice. The captions were masterfully vague, hinting at intimacy and conquest without ever being explicit. It was a digital peacock display, designed to project an image of effortless success and infinite desirability. But the real breakthrough came from a more direct, if risky, approach. Through a series of discreet inquiries, I found a woman named Elise, a former colleague of Nathan's who had left Omnicorp a year prior under vague circumstances. I reached out to her under the pretense of networking, of seeking information about the corporate culture at her old company. After a few preliminary emails, we spoke on the phone. Her voice was cautious, guarded. But when I carefully steered the conversation to Nathan, the caution gave way to a cold, hard bitterness. "Nathan is a master of emotional manipulation," she said, the words precise and edged with steel. "He has a gift for mirroring people, for making you feel like he is the only person on earth who truly sees you. He did it to me. He becomes your biggest champion, your confidant. He creates this secret, intoxicating world just for the two of you. And then, once he has what he wants, your ideas, your loyalty, your affection, you cease to be of use. And he doesn't just move on. He makes sure you can't talk. He subtly undermines you, makes you look unstable to your colleagues. He's not just a user. He's an artist of character assassination." Her story was a chilling echo of what I was witnessing with Sophia. The initial charm, the creation of a special connection, the feeling of being seen. It was a playbook, and Sophia wasn't his partner in a passionate affair. She was simply the lead actress in his latest production. The anger that had been simmering within me began to transform. It became colder, denser, more focused. This was no longer just about my marriage. It was about him. This man who moved through the world like a virus, leaving a trail of emotional and professional devastation in his wake, all while smiling for the cameras. I had let him into my home, my life. I had watched him poison my wife's mind against me. He believed he was invisible, that his actions had no consequences beyond the thrill of the moment. He was wrong. I was not just another jealous husband. I was the consequence he never saw coming. In the aftermath of the party, a strange and brittle quiet settled over our house. Sophia was a ghost in her own home, her usual vibrant energy replaced by a subdued, anxious presence. She moved with a kind of cautious uncertainty, as if the very ground beneath her feet had become unstable. It was guilt, I knew, but it was a shallow, self-serving kind of guilt, born not of empathy for my pain, but of the dawning, terrifying realization that she might have overplayed her hand. I chose a strategy of tactical distance. Direct confrontation, I knew, would only trigger her well-honed defenses. She would deflect, gaslight, and reframe the narrative until I was the unreasonable one, the one who couldn't take a joke. So I let her marinate in the awkward silence. I let her feel the weight of her own words hanging in the air between us, toxic and undeniable. The social fallout from her public declaration was subtle but immediate. Our friends were not cruel, but there was a new, cautious energy in their interactions with her. Clara, in particular, was a barometer of the changing atmosphere. She had pulled me aside as the party was winding down, her expression a mixture of fury and concern. "I don't know what's gotten into her, Ethan," she'd said, her voice a low, angry hiss. "But that man, Nathan, he's poison. You can see it in his eyes. He's enjoying this. He's enjoying the chaos he's creating. Everyone sees it. Everyone but Sophia." I'd replied, the words tasting like ash. Clara's sentiment was a quiet echo in the days that followed. Friends who would normally text Sophia directly were now texting me, asking if everything was okay. A coded inquiry into the state of our union. The social ecosystem we had so carefully cultivated was now treating her as a volatile element, an unpredictable force. She had to have noticed. It was Lila, however, who provided the most direct insight into Sophia's fracturing psyche. She appeared at our door one afternoon with a transparently flimsy excuse about returning a book. I could see the real reason for her visit in her anxious eyes. "She's a mess," Lila said, her voice barely a whisper, as we stood in the foyer. "She won't admit it to me, but I can tell. She knows she crossed a line." "A line?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Lila, she took a flamethrower to the entire map." Lila winced. "I know. Just give her a minute, Ethan. She's stubborn as hell, but she's not stupid. The shine has to wear off him eventually." I wasn't so sure. Sophia's pride was a fortress, and admitting she had been so thoroughly duped by a man like Nathan would require a level of humility I hadn't seen from her in years. But then, the small signs of erosion began. She would linger at the dinner table, pushing food around her plate, her gaze flickering towards me when she thought I wasn't looking. She would initiate conversations about trivialities. The weather, a news story, only to let them die out, the unspoken topic between us a vast, unbridgeable chasm. One night, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found her sitting in the dark living room, her face illuminated by the cold, blue light of her phone. She was staring at the screen, but her expression was not one of connection or pleasure. It was one of profound, weary sadness. She didn't notice me at first. When she finally did, she startled, quickly locking the screen and forcing a brittle smile. "Couldn't sleep," she'd said, her voice thin. "Neither could I'd replied, and let the silence hang there, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was in those moments that I began to understand. The thrill was gone. Nathan's charm, so intoxicating under the flattering lights of a party, was likely becoming demanding and cloying in the harsh light of day. The grand, cinematic passion she had imagined was revealing itself to be a cheap, tawdry affair. She was beginning to realize what she stood to lose. But guilt was not enough. Realization was not enough. An apology would not be enough. She had made a choice. She had publicly aligned herself with him. And until she made a conscious, definitive choice to undo that, to come back, I would remain a distant, watchful observer. The game was still in play, and it was her move. The quiet war of attrition in our home was a chess match played with silent glances and unspoken accusations. While Sophia grappled with the souring of her grand passion, I shifted my focus from observation to orchestration. It was not enough for her to simply fall out of love with Nathan's manufactured charm. She had to witness the complete and utter demolition of the man she had chosen over me. I would not be the agent of his destruction, merely the architect. The demolition itself would be a public spectacle. My first move was to re-engage with Caleb. His initial intel had been invaluable, but I needed more than just reputation. I needed specifics. Over a round of golf, a neutral territory where men conduct their most sensitive business, I laid my cards on the table. "I need to know who Nathan has burned," I said, as we walked the seventh fairway. "Not just women. Professionally, I need to find the people whose careers he stepped on to get where he is." Caleb, to his credit, didn't flinch. He lined up his putt, sank it, and then turned to me, his expression serious. "I know a guy, a project manager at Nathan's last company. Nathan took credit for his team's biggest success and then had him pushed out during a restructuring. The man is still bitter. He might talk." Within 24 hours, I had a name, Marcus Thorne, and he was more than willing to talk. His story, recounted over a sterile conference call, was a damning indictment of Nathan's professional ethics. He described, in meticulous detail, how Nathan had systematically stolen his ideas, presented them as his own to senior leadership, and then engineered his dismissal. "He's a black hole," Marcus said, his voice tight with a rage that was still fresh after 2 years. "He pulls everything towards himself. Ideas, credit, praise, and nothing escapes. He leaves nothing but emptiness behind." Next, I leveraged Elise's initial testimony. With her reluctant permission, I reached out to another former female colleague she had mentioned, a woman who had also been a target of Nathan's mentorship-turned-manipulation. Her story mirrored Elise's, adding another layer to the emerging pattern. He was a predator with a system. At home, I used this new information to apply subtle, psychological pressure on Sophia. I no longer needed to be overt. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Now I just needed to water them. "Heard a story about a guy at Omnicorp's biggest competitor," I said one evening, feigning casual interest as I scrolled through a business news site on my tablet. "Apparently, he built his whole career on taking credit for his team's work. Eventually, it all came out. Man lost everything." I didn't look at her, but I could feel her ghost still beside me on the sofa. The turning point, the moment I knew Sophia was truly beginning to see, came during a phone call she had with Lila. I was in my home office, the door slightly ajar, and I overheard her side of the conversation. Her voice was low, frayed with a frustration that bordered on despair. I thought he was this brilliant leader," she said, her voice cracking. "But now, He's always taking credit for my team's ideas. He presents our work as his own in meetings. And Ethan has been so quiet, so calm through all of this. It's like he knows something I don't. I feel like I'm going insane. It was the confession I had been waiting for. Not to me, but to her friend, which made it all the more genuine. She was seeing him for what he was, a hollow man, a thief of intellectual property, a fraud. That was when I knew it was time to escalate. With the information from Caleb, Marcus, and Elise, I compiled a neat, anonymous dossier. A timeline of Nathan's professional misconduct, a collection of his subtle betrayals and overt thefts, supported by verifiable data and timelines. It was not a screed from a jealous husband. It was a cold, factual report on a professional liability. The next step was delivery. I didn't want it to come from me. That would be too easily dismissed. Instead, through a discreet corporate intelligence firm Ethan recommended, I arranged for the dossier to be leaked. Not to the press. That would be too messy, but to a single, influential board member at Omnicorp known for his ruthless adherence to corporate ethics. The trap was now set. The evidence was in play. Nathan believed he was untouchable, that his charm was an impenetrable shield. He had no idea that a quiet, methodical campaign was underway to strip him of his armor, piece by piece, until he was left standing naked and exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth. Sophia thought Nathan made her feel alive. Soon, she would get to watch his career die. The eve of the second party at Clara and James's house felt like the night before a military operation. The dossier on Nathan was a payload of truth, armed and waiting for deployment. I sat at my desk, the glow of my monitor casting long shadows across the room, reviewing the final pieces of the plan. This was not about simple revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was about justice. It was about a deliberate, calculated realignment of the universe. Sophia was a ghost in the house, her movements quiet, her presence subdued. The confident, radiant woman from the last party had been replaced by a haunted, uncertain version of herself. She knew, on some instinctual level, that a reckoning was coming. She could feel the barometric pressure dropping. She had not spoken Nathan's name in over a week, a silence that was more damning than any confession. The party itself was a masterpiece of social theater. The lighting, the music, the laughter, all the same elements were in play, but the subtext had changed entirely. This was not a celebration. It was an execution chamber, beautifully decorated. Sophia clung to my side, a gesture that would have once been welcome, but now felt like a desperate attempt to seek shelter from a storm of her own making. I was her reluctant anchor, a fixed point in the chaos she sensed was about to be unleashed. Nathan, on the other hand, was a study in oblivious arrogance. He strode into the room as if he owned it, his smile a weapon of mass distraction. He was the star of his own movie, utterly unaware that the audience had already read the script and knew how it ended. My allies were in place. Lila, playing the part of the devoted acolyte, intercepted him near the bar. Her role was simple. Keep him engaged, flatter his ego, and ensure his back was to the room when the first shots were fired. Clara, the ever-gracious hostess, moved through the crowd like a master strategist, steering key conversations, subtly preparing the ground. The dossier had been disseminated earlier that day, not as a physical document, but as a series of discreet, encrypted emails sent from a burner account to a select group of influential guests who also had professional ties to Omnicorp. It was a silent, digital assassination. The evening reached its crescendo when Nathan, emboldened by champagne and Lila's feigned adoration, decided to hold court. He gathered a circle, Sophia and me included, and began to pontificate on the importance of disruptive leadership and taking bold risks. It was his standard performance, a sermon from the high priest of corporate bullshit. As he spoke, a quiet hum began to build in the room. A phone screen lit up. A whispered comment passed between two guests. The digital dossier was being opened, read, and absorbed. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, the warm conviviality chilling into something tense and watchful. Caleb, my designated trigger man, made the first move. As Nathan paused for dramatic effect, Caleb stepped forward, his expression one of polite, professional curiosity. "That's a fascinating take, Nathan," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the chatter. but I think some of us here are more interested in your unique approach to team management. For instance, the Marcus Thorne project at your last company. Care to comment on how you foster such singular success? The room fell silent. Nathan's smile faltered. The name hung in the air like a puff of smoke from a gun. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he stammered. Oh, I think you do, a new voice said. It was another guest, a senior executive from a rival firm, now looking at Nathan with an expression of cold contempt. Or perhaps we should talk about the ethical complaints that were settled right before your departure? Sophia's hand, resting on my arm, tightened its grip until her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of dawning horror. She was connecting the dots, realizing that the whispers she'd been hearing at work, the stories I had casually mentioned, were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a history. Nathan was trapped. He looked around the circle, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for an ally. He found none. He was surrounded by a jury of his peers, all of them now armed with the damning truth of the dossier. He tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a professional smear campaign, but his voice was thin and reedy, his famous charisma evaporating under the glare of their collective judgment. As the party dissolved into a vortex of whispers and cold shoulders, Sophia pulled me towards a quiet corner, her face pale, her breathing shallow. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my expression calm, my gaze unwavering. "I did nothing, Sophia. I just turned on the lights." He did the rest to himself. She stared at me, speechless. The man she thought was a source of life had just had his own professional life executed in front of her. The truth was out, and now, she had nowhere left to hide from it. The fallout from Nathan's public immolation was swift and brutal. The whispers from the party became a roar in the corporate world. An official internal investigation was launched at Omnicorp, and Nathan was suspended, his golden reputation tarnished beyond repair. But the true aftermath, the one that mattered, took place in the suffocating quiet of our home. Sophia was shattered. She moved through the days like a wraith, the shockwaves of the party having broken not just her trust in Nathan, but her trust in her own judgment. I found her one morning at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, her face ashen. "Rough night?" I asked, pouring my coffee. Her head snapped up. "You don't have to enjoy this so much, Ethan." The accusation was so patently absurd it almost made me laugh. "Enjoy it." I set my mug down with a sharp click. "Do you have any idea what the last few months have been like? Watching the woman I love throw herself at a con artist? Watching him systematically manipulate you and isolate you? Watching you defend him? No, Sophia. There has been no enjoyment in any of this." Her face crumpled. "I didn't know," she whispered, the words a familiar, useless refrain. "I didn't know he was like that." "You didn't want to know?" I corrected her, my voice sharp. "The red flags were a goddamn parade, Sophia. But you were so captivated by the marching band you refused to see them. He made you feel special. He made you feel seen. And you were willing to trade everything we had for that feeling. Look where it got you." She flinched as if struck. For a moment, I saw the old, defensive fire in her eyes, but it died as quickly as it came, replaced by a wave of raw, unfiltered despair. "You're right," she admitted, her voice trembling. I let him ruin everything. It was a start, a crack in the fortress of her denial. But it wasn't enough. A few days later, the final blow came. An anonymous source, I suspected a vengeful Marcus Thorne, leaked the full dossier to a prominent industry journalist. The story broke online, a detailed, damning account of Nathan's career of deceit. His professional life was over. That evening, Sophia confronted me in the living room, her arms crossed, her expression a volatile mix of anger and shame. "You did this, didn't you? You leaked that story." I met her gaze without flinching. "Nathan did this to himself, Sophia. I just made sure the story had the right ending. I made sure he couldn't do to anyone else what he did to you, what he did to us." She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. A choked sob escaped her. "I was so stupid," she whispered into her palms. So stupid. "You didn't just let him, Sophia," I said, my voice softer now, but firm. "You chose him. Over me. Over this." I gestured around the room, at the life we had built. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with a terrifying, desperate plea. "How do I fix this, Ethan? I don't even know where to start." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the woman I had married. Not the ambitious, restless stranger, but the vulnerable, terrified person underneath. You start by owning it, I said. Every single piece of it. You start by figuring out what was so broken inside you that a man like Nathan seemed like an answer. You start by deciding if you're actually willing to fight for what's left of us. She nodded, the tears falling freely now. I am, she said, her voice a ragged whisper. I'll do whatever it takes. The words were sincere, I knew. But the road back from this wasteland was long, and I had no idea if either of us had the strength to walk it. The damage was done. The trust was gone. But as I looked at my wife, stripped bare of her pride and her delusions, I saw a flicker of something I thought was extinguished forever. A possibility. And for now, that would have to be enough. In the quiet aftermath, the house became a space of triumph. The immediate crisis was over. Nathan was a ghost, but the wounds were deep and infected. Sophia's journey back from the brink was not a straight line. It was a painful, stuttering process of self-excavation. The first sign that she was truly ready to confront her own demons came in the form of a phone call I overheard. She was in the kitchen, her back to me, her voice low. It was Elise on the other end. I only heard Sophia's side, but it was enough. I just wanted to say thank you, Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. And I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have seen. She paused, taking a shaky breath. He made me feel, but it wasn't real. None of it was. It was the first time I had heard her take accountability to someone other than me. It was a small step, but it was a step away from the solipsism of her own hurt and towards an understanding of the collateral damage she had caused. She resigned from her job the next day. There was no drama, no fanfare. She simply cleaned out her desk, walked away from the career she had poured her life into, and came home. It was an act of profound surrender, an admission that the world she had so desperately wanted to conquer was built on a foundation of lies. She began to spend her days at home, not listlessly, but with a strange, new purpose. She filled journals, went for long, solitary walks, and started therapy in earnest. She didn't talk to me much about her sessions, and I didn't ask. This was her work to do. My own work was to decide if I could ever move past the image of her laughing in another man's arms. One evening, I came home to find her at the dining room table, a stack of her journals in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of quiet resolve. I think I'm ready to talk, she said. I sat down, a knot of apprehension tightening in my chest. It wasn't about you, Ethan, she began, her gaze steady. I know I made it about you. That you don't make me feel alive. That was cruel, and it was a lie. This was never about a lack in you. It was about a void in me. I spent so many years chasing the next promotion, the next success, that I forgot how to just be. I didn't know who I was without the applause. Nathan, he was just the loudest applause in the room. He saw that void in me, and he filled it with cheap praise and false promises. She slid one of the journals across the table. You don't have to read it, but I want you to know that I'm not hiding anymore. I'm trying to understand the person who made those choices, so I can make sure she never comes back. I looked at the journal, then back at her. For the first time, I saw not just remorse, but a glimmer of the strong, self-aware woman I had first fallen in love with. The woman who had been buried under years of insecurity and ambition. Therapy won't fix this, Sophia, I said softly. Journals won't fix this. I know, she replied, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. But it's a start. I'm ready to do the work, Ethan. The real work. If you'll let me. The trust between us was a shattered vase, the pieces scattered across the floor. Rebuilding it seemed impossible. But as I sat there, looking at my wife, truly looking at her, stripped of all her pretenses, I knew I had to try. The path forward was treacherous and uncertain. But for the first time in a very long time, I believed it was a path we might be able to walk together. Healing is not a destination. It's a landscape you learn to navigate. The months that followed were a slow, arduous journey through that new terrain. The house, once a silent battleground, gradually became a space of tentative peace. The echoes of the storm remained, but they were softer now, less frequent. Sophia's commitment to her own reconstruction was unwavering. Therapy became her anchor, a place where she could dissect the motivations of the woman who had nearly destroyed our lives. She spoke of it with a kind of clinical detachment, as if studying a flawed but fascinating specimen. She was learning to separate her worth from her achievements, to find validation from within rather than from the fleeting applause of men like Nathan. Our own interactions were a delicate dance. We started with small steps. Shared meals without the oppressive weight of silence. Quiet evenings on the sofa, a comfortable distance between us, reading our own books. We were relearning how to simply occupy the same space without it feeling like a confrontation. The first true breakthrough came one Saturday morning. I was in the garden, trying to wrestle an overgrown patch of weeds into submission, when she came out with 2 cups of coffee. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a mug and started pulling weeds beside me. We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the birds and the soft tearing of roots from the earth. "I know I don't deserve your trust yet," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the dirt. "And I know I have no right to ask for it. But I needed to tell you. I'm not that person anymore. The one who needed the noise, the drama, the attention. I'm trying to learn how to be okay with the quiet." I looked at her, her face smudged with dirt, her expression open and vulnerable. The anger I had held onto for so long, a shield against more pain, began to feel heavy and useless. "I see you trying, Sophia," I said, and the words were true. It was not a declaration of forgiveness. It was not a promise of a future. It was an acknowledgement, a single, solid piece of ground in a shifting landscape. From there, we began to build. We talked, truly talked, for the first time in years. We spoke of our own resentments, my emotional distance, her chronic dissatisfaction. We excavated the ruins of our marriage and examined the fault lines that had been there long before Nathan. It was painful, ugly work, but it was necessary. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reached for my hand. It was a small, hesitant gesture. I didn't pull away. Her skin was warm against mine. "I know I can't erase what I did," she said, her voice quiet. "It will always be a part of our story." "Yes, it will," I agreed. "But maybe," she continued, her thumb tracing a slow circle on the back of my hand, "it doesn't have to be the end of it." I looked out at the horizon, at the brilliant, bleeding colors of the dying day. The scars of our past were still there, and they always would be. But for the first time, I felt the stirrings of a new emotion, something that felt less like the memory of love and more like the possibility of it. It was not the passionate, naive love of our youth, but something quieter, stronger, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the hard work of redemption. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new, more difficult, and perhaps more honest chapter.